I learned early that the first rule of containment wasn't about keeping things in. It was about keeping stories out. Rumors moved faster than pathogens at Site 19, and Area 51 was worse. I'd been at Groom Lake for 12 years, and I still hadn't decided if I was a jailer, a custodian, or just another cellmate. Either way, there were levels even the old-timers called off-limits. Buried sub-basements where the ventilation tasted metallic, and the walls remembered things better than we did. That night, I was halfway through reviewing a maintenance log, boredom distilled to its purest form, when my comm unit chirped with a priority override. The badge on my chest identified me as Containment Specialist Second Class J. Henley. But everyone called me Hen, or, when the mood was dark, Pallbearer. My job was to check the seals, run the diagnostics, and occasionally haul a corpse to the crematorium. Nothing noble, nothing glamorous. But I was good at it, and I knew how not to ask questions. The override tone was the same one they used for mass casualty drills, which was why I almost ignored it. There hadn't been a real breach since the Los Alamos transposon scare, and that was 3 years ago. Some idiot in biochem had decided to run gene splicing protocols using live viral samples. We lost 17 goats and a year's worth of lunches. Since then, the alarms just meant a sensor needed cleaning, or a junior had fried another relay with coffee. But this alert had a code I hadn't seen since my probation year. L27BR. Level 27. Not a drill. My pulse kicked. Old habits from the army, probably. I locked out my terminal and grabbed my kit. Medical scanner, hardcase pistol, sealed gloves, 2 ampules of D-203 suppressant, a ratty little notepad for field records. The others made fun of that last part, but paper didn't glitch and ink didn't crash in a power cut. The elevator down to the sub-basements was a steel coffin retrofitted from Cold War surplus. Security glass so thick it distorted faces. A fingerprint reader that stank of old latex powder. You needed a 6-digit code and 2 keys turned at once to even call it, and the guard in the booth, Morley, a squat man with a detachment badge, checked my clearance twice, squinting like he expected me to melt under scrutiny. "Level 27. That's not just a leak, Hen," he muttered as he ran my badge. "You sure about this?" I shrugged, tried not to show the tremor in my hand. "I go where they tell me." Morley grunted, keyed in his override, and the elevator doors rolled open with a hydraulic sigh. 2 more joined me for the ride. Coulter from Biocontrol, who wore his mask too early and always smelled of bleach, and Lynn, one of the young techs, fidgety and pale. Lynn was hugging a data slate like it could shield him from what waited below. He didn't say a word. As the elevator descended, the air pressure thickened, static on my tongue, the old sense memory of hydrogen sulfide and a trace of coolant oil. The overheads buzzed with low current. On the wall, an ancient placard read, "Levels 24-27, containment, no unauthorized access." Underneath, someone had scrawled a date, July 14th, 2003, and a single word, smudged. Vault fire. Coulter tried to make small talk about the anomaly. Probably a thermal sensor gone bad. Those things are older than Lynn. But he trailed off when the doors finally opened on level 27. No amount of humor stuck down here. Level 27 wasn't like the upper labs or the admin wings. It was a tunnel cut into ancient bedrock, lined with polymer tiles yellowed by decades of chemical mist and stress fractures. The floor flexed minutely underfoot, a design feature supposedly to absorb seismic shock. I always felt it made the place feel soft, like walking on a tongue. 3 doors led off the main corridor, each marked by faded hazard glyphs. The vault at the end, the only one with a triple bar lock and a hydraulic iris, was Zero's. The last time I'd come down here, the sarcophagus had been inert for so long that even the sensors had given up. Just a slab of composite surrounded by cooling pipes that hissed in winter and dripped in summer. The status readouts had been blank for years, supposedly. We stopped at the antechamber to suit up. Bioseal hoods, respirators, haptic gloves. The wall panels flickered through diagnostic cycles, the green light stuttering every few seconds. Lynn powered up the monitoring rig, his hands shaking enough to clack the stylus on the glass. Motion at 0405. Heartbeat, temperature spike, then it flatlined again. He showed us the readout. An ugly, jagged spike, then nothing. Telemetry says the sarcophagus is drawing power from an unassigned source. Coulter glanced at me. That's not possible. There's no live grid feed on this level. Not supposed to be, I said, thinking of the old maintenance logs, the ones they'd ordered sealed after vault fire. I remembered the photos. Scorched bone, melted badges, one team member with a handprint burned into the breastplate. The containment chief had said it was a textbook entity neutralization. But the records didn't match. 12 dead, a wing collapsed, and every sensor fried to glass. And 0, frozen in a casket of unmarked alloy. We keyed in the codes, passed the hand scan, and cycled the iris. The sound was like bone grating on metal, a vibration you felt in your teeth. The chamber beyond was colder, lit by 2 strips of emergency phosphor. The sarcophagus stood in the center, banded with cables, the surface mottled with a frost that didn't melt even in the humid air. Black composite, no maker's mark, just a single slot for diagnostic plugs. Lynn held back. Coulter and I moved closer, both of us with gloves up, sidearms drawn. I checked the control panel, static, blue lines rolling across a cracked display. The heartbeat monitor, ancient analog, brass needles, was ticking. Not steadily, but at random intervals. I circled the sarcophagus, eyeing the welds. Frost patterns spiraled outward, sharp, almost geometric, but never quite repeating. I remembered the debrief from years ago. 0 was xenobiological, multiphasic, non-reproductive. No one knew if it was a plant, animal, or something stranger. The only photo I'd seen showed a shape draped in silvered tissue, maybe 3 meters long, ridged along the back with bone or cartilage plates and too many limbs. 8, maybe more, some jointed wrong, ending in membranous fronds or finger-like digits. The face was shielded by overlapping armor like an insect's mandible, with rows of small, asymmetrical eyes scattered in a ring. No mouth, no obvious organs, just a mass that looked half-grown, half-built. Coulter whispered, "What if it's not dead?" I scanned the biosensors, oxygen draw, heat flux, EM readings. Nothing lined up. There was a pressure drop behind the sarcophagus, like something breathing in reverse, pulling air in, not pushing it out. A new alarm lit up on the external wall display. Level 26, North Vault. The screen flashed red, then glitched to black, then red again. Containment loss, level 26. Lynn dropped the slate. There's nothing in 26. They moved everything to 25 after the mycelium event. Run it again, I said. He shook his head, white as chalk. It's live. The sensors are reading movement. Multiple. I thumbed my radio. Control, this is Henley. Level 27. We have anomalous biosigns and an active breach on 26. Request lockdown immediate. Repeat immediate. Respond. The line popped with static, then a fragment of words. All units standby. Containment breach. I heard Coulter suck air through his teeth. Lynn was shaking now, muttering a prayer in a language I didn't recognize. In the stillness, I could hear a new sound from the sarcophagus, a low, granular scraping, like something hard shifting inside sand. The heartbeat needle kept ticking, the intervals tightening. That was when the iris behind us slammed shut, and the corridor lights died. Only the sarcophagus remained lit, encircled by its frozen geometry. The room seemed to shrink. The only exit gone, the alarms outside now muted, replaced by a dull, distant vibration. A warning from somewhere deeper in the base. All at once, I realized that the story of Specimen Zero wasn't over. We'd been measuring the wrong thing. It didn't matter what we called containment if the thing inside was only waiting. I looked down at my trembling hand, felt the sweat bead and freeze in the air. I thought about the old report, the names blacked out, the the phrase scrawled across the last page. It adapts. Above the sarcophagus, a pale bead of condensation slid down the composite and hit the floor with a sound like a bell. Somewhere far off, behind 3 meters of stone and steel, something else was waking up. And for the first time in years, I was afraid to turn my back. I heard the first lockdown siren as a vibration in my teeth, not a sound. It started somewhere in the foundation, a juddering pressure that travelled up the polymer tiles and set my bones on edge. Morley used to joke that you could tell how deep a breach was by the pitch. High for lab mistakes, low for something that shouldn't move at all. This was the lowest I'd ever felt. Red emergency lights snapped on along the corridor, painting everything in smudged arterial bands. No alarms on level 27 ever used white or blue. It was always the colour of warning, meant to keep your nerves sharp and your hands off your face. Lynn stumbled back, half blinded, as the main door Iris finished cycling shut behind us, with a grinding whine. All of our comms crackled and spat. I jabbed my lapel radio, but command was nothing but warbling static. Every word chewed up and spat out as if the signal itself was breaking down. Coulter moved first, always the procedural type. He toggled his chest-mounted tablet, swiping through emergency protocols as if bureaucracy could plug the hole we all felt yawning under our feet. Sectional containment go. Hen, Lynn, prioritize diagnostics on 0. I'll try to reach Central. I didn't need orders. I'd seen enough to know that if a containment breach spread upwards, it meant protocols had failed at least twice. We had a saying in Biohazard, once is a fault, twice is a system. Now the system itself was trembling. I edged toward the sarcophagus, careful to keep the containment pistol raised and both eyes on the monitors. The analog heartbeat still twitched, now with mechanical consistency, and every tick seemed to shudder through the alloy slab. I stared at that black surface, remembering the first and only time I'd glimpsed what was inside. I'd been a junior assistant, stuck behind glass as the original Vaultfire team wheeled it in. My memory offered only fragments, pallid limbs folded over themselves, almost jointed like spider legs but broader, more muscular. Mottled flesh the colour of smoke-stained porcelain, riddled with fibrous seams and hard carapace plates. Dorsal ridges splitting at the base into feathery gills or some kind of layered, flexible membrane for breathing. The hands were a tangle of flexible digits, each sprouting translucent, membranous webs, and there were at least 3 extra arms along one side, growing at odd, uneven angles. The head was almost shield-shaped, no jawline, no lips, but clusters of black glassy nodules arranged in a spiral on either side, like a face designed to see in every direction but never speak. I shook myself out of the memory as Lynn tried to steady his breathing. He was too young for this, skin slick with sweat beneath his hood. Why are we even down here? They said this thing was dead. They said level 27 was just a formality now. I wanted to say, they lie more often than they breathe, but instead I checked the panel. Diagnostics ran their cycles, but the data made no sense. Sarcophagus temperature up by 4 degrees, pressure differentials at the seams, electromagnetic noise climbing in a smooth, silent ramp. There was a smell now. A sting of old ozone mixed with something organic, the way a bag of cut grass goes bad if left in the sun too long. Coulter cut in. Comms are dead from 26 down. The auto bulkheads have closed between levels 24, 25 and 26. No confirmation from control. We're isolated. That was when a new alarm stuttered to life, the panel on the far wall flickering with a bank of numbers. Biohazard mobility, Vault 26, Vault 25, Vault 24. Multiple icons winked on and off, each a different containment cell. Some of the names were familiar: Haruspex 4D, Vesper Gland, Recombinant Alpha, each one a legacy of old black budget experiments. Nothing down here was allowed to die a natural death. Coulter tried to hail control again, barking into his wrist mic. Section 27 requesting immediate evac. Confirm, multiple containment failures. Level 27 is not secure. His voice trembled at the end, a slip he'd hate himself for. No answer, only static and a wet, distant clicking, like someone running their nails over plastic. I scanned the rest of the room. The temperature was still rising. On the sarcophagus, patches of frost had begun to run, water beading and streaking across the composite skin. Something inside was shifting. I could feel it, a vibration that you sensed in your gut, as if the pressure was persistently wrong. The biosensor needle moved, measuring what it could not classify. Behind us, Lynn's voice came. What if Zero is reactivating the others? Not just waking up, but signaling them? Coulter opened his mouth to argue, but the theory hung there, awful and plausible. Groom Lake's worst habit was forgetting that nothing in the vault stayed still forever. I thought of the old debrief, the redacted transcript. Subject demonstrates paracrine signaling through undetermined medium. Hypothesis: biological EM resonance, termed whispering. Coulter checked the breach map again. We have to move. If we lose this sector, the only way out is through 26. We follow the service corridor, bypass the main vaults. He gestured us forward, but as we crossed the threshold into the corridor, a metallic crash echoed up from the far end. Something slammed against a bulkhead, then a series of wet, irregular thuds, like a large animal testing the limits of its cage. Lights snapped on and off as we advanced, the floor quivering with each impact. At the cross junction, the security door had jammed, buckled from a force within. A fine dust, yellow, almost luminous, drifted through the air, catching on my suit like pollen. I wiped my visor and peered through the cracked window. What I saw nearly made me lose my grip on the pistol. Something was dragging itself down the corridor toward us. Its body was a mishmash of forms, a quadrupedal trunk, stretched long and thin as if fused from several animal spines, covered in patchwork skin of variegated color. Greys, ochres, streaks of livid green. Where legs should have ended in paws, they flared instead into clusters of chitinous claws, some bent at weird angles, others twitching spasmodically. Sprouting from its back were vestigial wings or fins, tattered and wet, studded with what looked like teeth, perhaps from its last kill, perhaps grown from within. Its face was a warped suggestion of a canine muzzle, split by a line of hard ridges, with a single, jaundiced eye set in a socket that glimmered with shifting, iridescent film. The jaw opened as it moved, to exhale a string of thick, luminous mucus across the tile. Lynn reeled, gagging behind his respirator. Coulter drew his sidearm, but the angle was blocked. There was no clean shot. The thing stopped, sensing us, its limbs tense as bowstrings. Then it lunged, smashing its skull into the buckled door. The metal dented further, alarm klaxons started up somewhere distant. Coulter, moving quickly, dug a mag flare from his kit and jammed it against a crack in the door. With a twist of the igniter, a burst of magnesium blue light flooded the corridor. The creature shrieked, a sound like boiling water forced through pipes, and recoiled, two of its legs scraping grooves into the polymer floor as it retreated. I fired 2 rounds into the ceiling, aiming for a security conduit that spat a rain of cables onto the floor, trying to slow the thing's advance. The corridor filled with the reek of burnt insulation and scorched polymer. Coulter grabbed Lynn by the collar and shoved him toward the emergency stairwell at the junction. We hustled up 2 flights, the pounding of the creature pursuing us up the shaft. On the landing between levels, Lynn collapsed, wheezing, his face smeared with sweat. Coulter bent over him. "Stay with me, Lynn. Deep breaths. You good?" Lynn nodded weakly. I scanned our surroundings. The stairwell was a service shaft, bare aluminum walls, patched conduit boxes, each labeled in stenciled black marker by bored technicians from a decade ago. Emergency rations and chemical respirators stacked under a mesh grate. It felt almost normal, like the world hadn't changed just a few meters below. But there was no forgetting the sound of claws scraping and wet breath rasping up behind us. I keyed my radio again. "Control, this is Henley. Multiple breaches confirmed. Unknown entities mobile. Requesting evacuation route. Respond." A crackle, then something new. a burst of rapid clipped clicks. Then the static resolved into a single distorted phrase. All units, isolate, fail, containment, Route 12, terminate. I slammed the radio off. The message wasn't for us. It was command, or what was left of it, issuing generic kill orders. We had a choice. Try for the upper service hatches, if they weren't already locked down. Or risk the main labs, where God knew what else was waking up. Coulter looked at me. We try for the surface. Protocol is dead. It's every man for himself now. Lynn whimpered, curling up around his data slate. We're not making it out. They'll torch the whole block before they let us reach daylight. He was probably right. Groom Lake had 100 protocols for getting rid of witnesses, maybe more for containing leaks. I remembered the old rumors. The vent gas that left nothing but calcified bones. The elevator overrides that dropped straight into flooded sump pits. But I also remembered the vault fire transcripts. The lines blacked out by someone's hand. The phrases that stuck in my head like a sliver. It's learning. Don't let it access the grid. We are not the apex here. I leaned back against the wall, breathing shallow, trying not to picture the thing behind the door, or the thing in the sarcophagus, still ticking. Coulter reloaded his pistol and handed Lynn a shock baton. You take the rear. Hen, with me. We moved through the shaft, up another level, into the old diagnostic lab. A space where the air was thick with the ghosts of failed experiments. Autoclave racks, shattered glassware, half-dissembled biosuits, bloodstains oxidized to dark, oily patches. No signs of life, but a ceaseless rattle from the vents. I checked my pistol, hands slick in the gloves. We edged along the perimeter, every shadow suspect. Lynn froze at a bank of observation windows. There's something outside. Across the sealed access corridor, another vault had blown open, the heavy blast door sagging on its hinges. A trail of viscous, deep violet fluid marked a path through the detritus. Whatever was loose had gone through recently, and it was big. The air shimmered with motes of dust, each floating lazily, but not a single one touched the purple smear, as if repelled by a charge. Coulter leaned over, squinting. Is that Alpha? He was right. Recombinant Alpha was one of the first vault specimens, a hybridized carnivore with bony armor and a triple-jointed hind limb designed to climb sheer surfaces. Its skin was patterned with pale, branching scars that glowed when agitated. The record said it had been inactive for 8 years. Its cell was supposed to be triple-sealed, with redundant gas suppression. Now there was only an empty vault, and that trail of viscera leading deeper into the facility. I felt a surge of old terror, almost welcome in its clarity. We keep moving, I said. We don't look back. We hurried past the shattered vault. Lynn tripped and caught himself on a decontamination arch. His gloves left streaks on the plastic, and for a second I thought I saw something move in the periphery, a blur of scaled flesh vanishing into the ceiling tiles. We reached the intersection with Level 25's main control room, sealed tight, but the maglocks cycled between live and dead, meaning someone inside was trying to keep something out. Or maybe us. I banged on the panel, but there was no answer. Just a stutter of light, then the abrupt blackout as the backup batteries died. In the dark, I heard Coulter swear. We're cut off. All we've got is the emergency lighting. Lynn whimpered. I can't see. Coulter squeezed his shoulder. You will. Just keep moving. We stick together. That's how we survive. But in my bones, I knew the truth. We were alone. The only light coming from the ugly glow of the sarcophagus status beacon, still blinking somewhere below. Something massive was coming down the corridor, each step sending tremors through the tile. Lynn's breathing sped up, too loud. Coulter tensed, weapon raised, but I could see the fear in his posture, the way he hunched his shoulders, shrinking from whatever came. The power cut out completely. Darkness absolute, and then the heavy, shuffling approach. Something with too many joints, claws skittering across tile, a breath like old machinery warming to life. The darkness deepened, emergency lighting guttering into near black. Only the barest glimmer from my wrist lamp caught the glistening trail on the floor. Whatever had escaped from the vaults had passed this way and was circling back, or perhaps being drawn here by us. The stench intensified, a mix of scorched plastic and something animal, sweet and rotten, crawling up my nose and making it hard to swallow. Coulter hissed, "Get ready to move. Hen, left corridor. Lynn, stay close." But as he spoke, the bulkhead at our backs rattled, and something heavy slammed into the opposite door, denting it inward. A raking sound, claws or bone-scraping metal, made Lynn flinch, and I saw his knees nearly buckle. There was no coordinated retreat, only panic. Coulter shoved Lynn toward the intersecting corridor, but a shudder ran through the walls, and a ceiling panel crashed down between us, scattering dust and insulation. A flailing limb, long, greyish, jointed like a mantis, jabbed through the darkness just inches from my face, slamming into the wall and rebounding. I lunged away by reflex, grabbing Lynn by the arm, but he slipped free, pulled by Coulter, both of them already vanishing through the haze of broken tile and choking dust. Coulter made a grab for Lynn, hauling him bodily toward the closest access hatch, but Lynn froze, eyes wide, paralyzed by the onrush of panic. Another impact, heavier this time, rattled the service panel at my side, sending a sharp jolt through the wall. Instinct surged. I fumbled at the manual release, fingers slipping on the gritty metal, just as Coulter's hand drove hard between my shoulder blades, propelling me toward the hatch. Behind them, a shape came into view, spined carapace glistening in the scant light, limbs flexing in unnatural geometry, filling the corridor with shifting, angular menace. Lynn's face was locked in a scream, terror stretched taut across his features. The tangle of limbs swept between us, obscuring everything in a whiplash of motion and shadow. I barely registered the movement. I staggered through the service hatch, spun, and wrenched the lever down just as Coulter yanked Lynn after him. For an instant, I saw their faces lit by a sliver of red emergency light, Coulter's mask streaked with blood, Lynn's mouth open in a silent plea. Then a tangle of limbs swept between us, obscuring everything. I slammed the hatch shut, cranked the lock until my wrists ached. The sounds on the other side, shouting, metal crunching, something heavy scraping, and a high animal shriek, filled the corridor for a few seconds, then vanished into muffled, rattling silence. My breath rasped inside my hood. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would drown out everything else. I pressed my back to the wall, tasting panic, and let the world contract to that narrow shaft, that locked hatch, that single point of light on my battered wrist lamp. Only when the adrenaline ebbed did I realize I was alone, truly cut off. The only thing I could hear was my own pulse, and somewhere behind the walls, the hungry stirrings of something that had learned to navigate the dark better than any of us ever could. The first thing I noticed after the hatch sealed behind me was the blood. It had pooled at my elbow, sticky against the lining of my suit, warm where it seeped through a tear just above my wrist. I pressed 2 fingers to the wound and felt the edge, shallow but long, a souvenir from the scramble and the corroded metal. I kept the pressure on it, counting slowly. The blood slowed, though each heartbeat sent a new ache down to my palm, and I fumbled for my field kit. The dressing was a polymer mesh designed to bond to wounds in seconds, but my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it twice before I managed to wrap the tear. The mesh tightened, biting into skin, releasing a chemical chill that almost masked the pain. I slumped against the wall, letting my head fall back, my breathing ragged behind the mask. The service shaft was cramped, lined with conduit piping and manual breakers, labelled with numbers I had never learned. Above me, the hatch was already damp with condensation. I could still hear distantly the chaos from the corridor, scraping, shouting, the snap of bone, and something else. A slithering movement, followed by silence. I waited, every muscle in my body tight with the expectation that something would claw through the thin hatch. I was alone, armed with a pistol that might slow a dog-sized specimen but wouldn't do much against whatever Zero had become, a shock baton, half a ration bar, and 2 suppressor ampules. The notepad was still there in my vest pocket, ink smudged from sweat. I gripped it like a talisman and forced myself upright. The shaft was meant for maintenance crews, tight, twisting, with metal stairs that creaked under my weight. Every third step I checked my surroundings, making sure the mesh panel above the lights hadn't been forced open or warped. The old rules applied. Trust the things you could touch, not the readouts. The emergency lamp on my wrist was the only light I had. Its beam threw everything into harsh relief, outlining the spatter of oil, bits of chewed-up cable, and, at the next turn, a splatter of something that looked like old paint, but glistened, sticky, violet black. I leaned closer. The smell hit me first. Iron and ammonia, sharp as a chemical burn. I recognized it from the files. Recombinant alpha, one of the early crossbred specimens. It had been caged for years and sedated twice as often as anything else, a legacy of failed ambitions and a warning against hubris. I followed the trail at a distance, careful not to let my boots touch the worst of it. The farther I went, the less the base looked like itself. The walls, once uniform composite, now bore patches of roughened growth, like calluses, layered tissue fusing with insulation. Small nodular masses spread out from corners, each marked by fine cilia that moved when I passed. Here and there, pipes had been chewed open and resealed with a resinous substance that glowed green, casting halos on the ground. The climate was changing too. The temperature had risen enough that sweat trickled down my back, making my gloves slippery, and the air felt heavier, as if charged with dust. My lungs ached after every breath. I took a turn into what should have been an equipment storage room, only to find it transformed. The shelves were warped and half collapsed, covered in spindly, bone-white stalks that looked like fungal fronds, until I realized they were plastic zip ties, fused together and extended by organic material. Something had repurposed them, knitting tech and tissue into a living barricade. On the floor, a technician in a torn biohazard suit lay sprawled, helmet cracked, jaw wrenched open. His face was obscured, but his badge, red, marked P. Mukherjee, Diagnostics, rested on his chest, caked in the same green resin. I knelt beside him, careful not to touch the exposed flesh, and checked his pack. No weapon, just an injector, empty, stamped for anticonvulsants, and a radio, battery gnawed by teeth. Something rustled in the wreckage, sharp and insectile, and I backed away, shining the light toward the sound. A small creature scuttled from the corner, squat, six-limbed, pale with translucent plates and a bulbous head. Its eyes were colorless, recessed under a chitinous brow, and its mouth split sideways, revealing a set of fine, needle-like teeth. The body was patched with old scars, two limbs ending in withered stumps. It froze in the light, staring at me for a moment, before darting behind a broken cabinet. I made a note in the pad, adaptation, minor specimen, peripheral scavenger, then closed the book. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. Zero's influence wasn't confined to the vault anymore. The overheads now blinked in patterned intervals, not random but regular, almost as if tracking my movement. At the next junction, I paused. Two figures blocked the corridor ahead, hunched over something that twitched and gasped. They were larger than the scavenger, one built like a malformed canine, its hide pieballed with scars and ridged with extruded cartilage. The other serpentine, elongated, skin smooth and glistening, with a skull-like head and pinprick eyes spaced in a line along each side. The canine one tore a strip of flesh from the twitching thing. A third specimen, half-formed and barely viable, perhaps a failed offspring or just another experiment gone wrong. The serpentine form coiled around the remains, tongue flicking out to taste the air. Both froze when my light caught them. The canine creature bared its teeth, black and jagged, and let out a low, chesty growl that vibrated through the floor. The serpentine one merely watched, unblinking, as if weighing its options. I backed up slowly, keeping the pistol aimed low, trying to make myself small. The canine sniffed, turned, and snatched the last fragment of meat before loping off into a side vent, claws clattering on the tiles. The serpent lingered, mouth gaping, showing rows of tiny, backward-hooked fangs. It stared for another 10 seconds before following, leaving me with only the stench of blood and the sound of my own breath. It was then that the world seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, the air thick with memory. I remembered vault fire, the smell of ozone, the panic in the corridors, the way the air turned metallic, and the alarms never stopped. I remembered the faces of the recovery team, each one drawn and sunken by the end, the institutional language in their final reports: incident contained, assets neutralized, learning opportunity. None of it meant anything now. Arrogance dressed as protocol, every page of it stained with the same blood that now soaked the floors around me. I forced myself forward. At a sealed checkpoint, I found a cracked monitor looping the same broken message: Protocol Zeta, containment failure, all biohazards to be sterilized. The video feed was warped, colors bleeding at the edges, but I caught a glimpse of movement, something vast and many-limbed dragging itself past the main bulkhead, dorsal plates gleaming in the low light, fronds or antennae unfurling from its back. Even through the distortion, I recognized the geometry: Specimen Zero. It moved with intent, every limb perfectly coordinated, as if conducting an orchestra only it could hear. Where it passed, smaller creatures followed, sloughing off the walls and floors like parasites seeking a host. I stumbled into a small lab annex, locking the door behind me. My legs trembled, pain radiating from the cut. I slumped against a console and thumbed through the records. The system was on auxiliary power, most files corrupted, but a recent log caught my eye. Zero exudes particulate field, EM chemical, stimulates dormant specimens. Spontaneous adaptation observed. Hypothesis: directed awakening. The next entry was voice only, an engineer muttering through gasps. It's teaching them. They move in patterns, block routes, cut comms. Not random. It's a command network, not a breach. The final file was a map, sterilization points marked in red, with a countdown overlay. Less than 2 hours until full sweep. After that, nothing living would remain below level 23. A crackle from the broken radio made me jump. Through the static came a clipped transmission. Zeta protocol. All survivors to upper access. Unauthorized movement triggers suppression. Repeat all. Initiate lockdown. Then a burst of code unintelligible. I scanned the remaining gear. A coilgun prototype, jury-rigged for security use. Low ammo, but a lot of punch. And a thermal suppressant grenade marked for emergency use only. The technician's notebook was scrawled with last-ditch escape plans, most scratched out, but one line stood out. Prime Vault, manual override, direct line to core, only shot. I stared at the map. The only way to make a difference was to reach the central vault, the original containment chamber. I loaded the coil gun, clipped the suppressant to my belt, and pushed myself back into the corridor. The base was unrecognizable now. Lights strobed in sequences, shadowed by forms that slithered and crawled just beyond the reach of my lamp. Every surface felt alive. Every corner held the promise of ambush. I moved quickly, conserving breath, one hand on the pistol and the other on the notepad, making notes as if they could anchor me to reality. I found more bodies, some still in their suits, others half absorbed into the growths on the walls, their flesh braided with filaments that writhed when I passed. One wore a badge from command. I took his keycard, barely able to meet his eyes. Just before the final stairwell, I paused at a viewing window into the main experimental bay. Inside, 2 specimens fought, a quadrupedal brute, skin split by bone spurs, and something arachnoid, all jointed legs and iridescent shell. The fight was silent but vicious, claws and limbs tearing, ichor spraying across the tiles. Neither fought like an animal. Their movements were calculated, probing each other's weaknesses. When the arachnoid lost a limb, it pivoted, lashing out with its remaining legs to cut the brute's hamstrings. The brute responded by grabbing the severed limb in its jaws and wielding it like a club. I watched, transfixed, as the arachnoid drove the brute back toward a wall where a vent had been pried open. Both creatures wary of the opening, as if something even worse waited inside. I left them to it, moving down the last flight of stairs, sweat stinging my eyes. I keyed the command badge at the security door and was relieved when the lock clunked open. The vault antechamber was untouched by the growth that had overtaken the rest of the base, proof that some boundaries still held. I checked my watch. Less than an hour now before sterilization. I stared at the final door, hand over the override switch. I could hear something moving inside, a steady scrape of claw on tile, the exhale of something enormous drawing breath. Remembering every name on the Vaultfire memorial, every warning I'd ignored, every protocol that had been just a lie we told ourselves to sleep. I pressed the override, feeling the old cold return as the seals disengaged, and stepped forward, coil gun ready, into the heart of the outbreak. The only way out was through Zero itself, and whatever it had become in the years we had left it, to dream in the dark. The air inside the vault was sharp enough to sting my lungs. Even in the low light, the scale of what had taken root here was impossible to ignore. The chamber, once a uniform octagon lined with seamless composite panels and embedded sensors, was now a terrain of layered deformity. Organic plates fused with shorn cables, bone and resin grafted to fractured steel. The overhead pipes had split open, their insides invaded by branching root-like structures that glistened with oily secretions, and the old coolant lines ran along the floor in tangled braids, many sections now encased in a waxy, translucent sheath. Each step I took left a print on the biofilm that had overtaken the tiles, soft and fibrous and warm underfoot. The sarcophagus that had held Specimen Zero was gone from its cradle, dragged clear across the vault and burst open against the far wall. Its alloy shell was warped from the inside, a deep furrow cut straight through the diagnostic ports. The frost that once clung to its surface had evaporated, replaced by a rime of granular crystals that sparkled, shifting from grey to dull violet as I moved my lamp. Strips of plating had been bent aside in ragged arcs, and the interior, visible through a wide tear, was smeared with a viscous yellow substance and scattered fragments of tissue. The unmistakable impression of taloned limbs and a segmented torso had pressed deep into the now ruined padding, as if something immense had wrenched itself upright after years of coiling in darkness. I edged deeper into the chamber, coil gun leveled, careful not to brush against the thicker clusters of resin that veined the support columns. There was movement near the heart of the vault. A shiver through the tangled pipes, a heavy weight shifting just beyond the arc of my light. I could hear the scrape of segmented limbs on steel, as if the thing inside was as curious about me as I was about it. Then it came into view, unfolding itself from behind the wreckage of its containment pod. Specimen Zero, fully awake. I had seen the old security footage, the few stills from Vaultfire, and none of it had prepared me for the living reality. Zero was massive, nearly 4 meters in length if stretched flat, its body a labyrinth of muscular segments, armored with a plating that merged biological and metallic textures in seamless interlock. Each limb was jointed twice, the upper segments thick and sheathed in pale, porous armor, the lower limbs narrowing to flexile, membranous digits that could grip or rake as needed. Along its back, a series of dorsal plates rose and fell with its breathing, and beneath these, rows of branching fronds fanned outward, swaying in the chill air, each tip twitching as if tasting the environment. Its skin was a mosaic of muted grey, ochre, and faded blue. Patches of pigment glimmered with a dull iridescence where light struck oil or moisture. The head was shield-shaped, wide across the brow, narrowing into a heavy bone ridge that swept down to where a human might have a mouth, though here the mouth was nothing but a seam, twitching with muscular movement. Above the ridge, a ring of black, glassy eyes reflected my lamp in shifting constellations. Some large and wet, others minute, each fixed on me with unblinking precision. A crown of finer appendages rose from just behind the brow. Feelers, perhaps, or sensors of some kind, each flexing and coiling as Zero's focus shifted. I did not move. For a long moment, it only watched. There was no overt aggression, no wild thrashing or noise, only the measured, almost contemplative posture of a creature accustomed to studying as much as being studied. The fronds on its back quivered and fanned wider. The limbs tensed, but held close to its torso, as if gathering information from every available input. Something about the moment struck me as familiar, absurdly so, the way a technician might watch a caged animal, waiting for a sign of learning, or for some spark of recognition. I realized then that the roles had reversed. I was the anomaly, the unknown, and Zero was the observer. The training manuals had always said that eye contact was meaningless for most alien forms, but I found myself unable to look away, hypnotized by the living calculus behind that gaze. My mind scrambled for protocol, containment, threat assessment, deterrence, knowing none of it applied now. Zero moved, the motion fluid and preternaturally precise. Two of its limbs extended outward, their tips pressed flat to the floor as if bracing for action, while a third limb reached for a broken section of steel grating and flexed it into a rough arc, demonstrating strength but not yet violence. I inched backward, triggering the motion sensor in my suit's helmet, activating the suppressor ampule clipped to my belt. The chemical agent hissed, spraying a narrow cone of vapor between us. Zero stopped, its dorsal plates flattening, the fronds collapsing tight to its back. The vapor rolled over its skin and seemed to be absorbed, but there was no sign of distress. It extended a limb, dipped its digits in the residue, and brought them to the seam of its mouth, where the skin opened by a fraction. A taste test, a sampling. It learned. I saw the shift in posture, the way it stored the memory, the new calculation in its eyes. The coil gun's targeting laser wavered as my hands began to shake, so I forced myself to steady the barrel, stepping laterally to keep clear of a cluster of resin sacks bulging along the wall. My earpiece activated. Static, then a broken command transmission. Facility sweep. Detonation in minutes. All personnel evacuate. Containment override. Zero advanced, moving in a wide arc that forced me to retreat toward the vault's secondary exit. As it approached, I saw the results of its presence up close. Wiring twisted and rebraided. Containment locks warped and bonded with tissue. Old defensive turrets torn open and replaced with coiling strands of bone. The dead lay where they had fallen, some half absorbed by the resin, their equipment already being integrated into the living structure. Every trace of the facility's design had been bent or consumed, a new order growing in its place. My thoughts scattered as Zero tested my patience. It darted forward in a sudden blur, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The fronds on its back spreading wide, now bristling with tiny hooks and needle-like cilia. I fired the coil gun once, an arc of blue-white energy hammered into Zero's left limb, tearing a shallow furrow through both flesh and plating. Instead of recoiling in pain, Zero froze, watching the wound as it smoked and bled a syrupy, colorless fluid. I saw muscle fiber knitting, bone rehardening in seconds, the membrane growing thicker, more opaque. Zero's head turned sharply toward me, and I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation of being scanned, broken down, understood at a level that bypassed language. With a high, resonant exhale, Zero charged, all limbs extended, sweeping me backward into the wall. I triggered the suppressant grenade, flinging it between us as I ducked away. The burst filled the air with a cloud of freezing vapor and chemical foam. Zero thrashed through it, its movement distorted, limbs slipping on the coated tiles. I saw plates along its flank shed in curling strips, replaced in moments by thicker, darker armor. I ducked behind a collapsed column, clawed at my suit to find the last ampule, and jabbed it into my thigh, letting the adrenaline rush clear the fog from my vision. The plan, such as it was, came in pieces. The vault's emergency lockout could be triggered manually, sealing this chamber and the next with reinforced gates, but only from the access panel beside the primary exit. If I could lure Zero close enough, trigger the lock, and escape through the secondary maintenance tunnel, I might trap it long enough for the sterilization protocol to sweep the lower levels. I emerged from cover and drew Zero's focus with a blast from the coil gun, this time targeting the resin clusters on the wall. The impact sent a rain of acrid fluid and splinters across the floor. Zero shrieked, limbs flashing, and darted after me, each step fracturing the biofilm, leaving streaks of viscous fluid in its wake. I backpedaled towards the panel, keying in the override code with numb fingers, the lights around the exit flashing yellow as the system accepted the command. Zero caught up, one limb striking my shoulder and spinning me hard against the control column. My arm went numb, the coil gun skittering across the floor. I crawled, boots slipping on resin as Zero's head loomed over me. Its eyes bore down, unblinking, as the seam of its mouth opened wider, revealing rows of fine, bristling filaments. Its breath washed over me, laden with the scent of mineral and spoiled protein, and the world narrowed to that gaze, that pressure, that sense of intelligence so profound it felt inhuman. With the last of my strength, I triggered the lockout. Alarms shrieked, bulkheads grinding into place. Zero reared back, limbs lashing the walls, tearing gouges through metal and tissue alike. I rolled for the maintenance hatch, scraping skin from my knuckles as I forced it open, barely squeezing through as the gates sealed behind me. The last thing I saw before the panel slammed shut was Zero pressed against the glass, fronds flaring, eyes blazing with reflected emergency light, and the unmistakable impression that it understood. This was not defeat, only delay. The tunnel beyond was dark, choked with stinging chemical haze and crawling warmth from the facility's failing systems. I pushed through on elbows and knees, head swimming from pain and blood loss, trailing resin and foam from my suit. My comm unit barked another warning. Detonation. 1 minute. Final lockdown. And I staggered upright, pressing forward into the cross corridor, blind to everything but the need to climb. The building shook beneath my feet, a resonant boom rising from the levels below as the sterilization protocol swept the containment decks. The lights above glared in urgent flashes, and every alarm felt like a countdown to extinction. I moved through the ruins of laboratories, hallways warped by heat and impact, past shattered glass and the warped outlines of those who hadn't made it. I found the final hatch to the upper levels hanging open, its lock blown, and forced myself through, collapsing onto the polished concrete of the first secure corridor I had seen in what felt like a lifetime. Behind me, the doors sealed. An automated warning flashed red across the walls. Biohazard containment complete. Access denied. I lay on the floor, suit shredded, vision tunneling, aware only of the dull ache in my limbs and the pounding in my skull. The voices came next. Shouts, running boots, the clipped, panicked orders of security teams. Someone pulled me upright, shouting questions I could barely understand. Above it all, the alarms began to subside, replaced by the familiar, numbing buzz of the upper-level systems. The base was secure. I had made it. In that moment, as the medics cut away my suit and pressed oxygen to my face, I thought not of the protocol or the disaster averted, but of Zero, caged below but changing still, learning even in confinement. I remembered the way its eyes had followed me, unblinking, as if memorizing my shape, storing every detail for the future. I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that this was not an ending. The arrogance of control had brought us nothing permanent. But for now, I was alive. And somewhere far beneath the concrete and alarms, so was Zero. They kept me in quarantine for 9 days, sealed behind observation glass, subject to a battery of tests that ran the gamut from simple blood work to neural mapping and deep tissue biopsies. The doctors never answered questions, only recited protocols, their faces shuttered with a kind of bureaucratic fear. Once or twice I glimpsed a suit from oversight in the hall, their badge a blank rectangle and their eyes fixed on the floor. There were no visitors, no explanations, just a growing sense that survival was as damning as infection. Word filtered in slowly. The official report blamed a catastrophic systems failure, a thermal event in the sublevels that destroyed most biological assets and rendered level 27 permanently inaccessible. Security teams swarmed the upper decks, running drills, updating clearances, and sending anyone with a hint of contamination to medical or, more quietly, to debriefing and memory review. I overheard someone say the lower vaults had been filled with aerated concrete and sealed under 6 meters of steel. "Nothing gets out," they promised, as if words alone could anchor reality. On the 10th day, I signed a stack of forms I wasn't allowed to read and was escorted topside by a pair of guards in unmarked uniforms. The desert air outside was sharp and clean, the sky a blinding blue that seemed impossible after so much time underground. I stood on the tarmac, blinking against the sunlight, and tried to breathe in the simple, uninfected space around me. I think about Zero every day. I picture its armored limbs folding in the dark, the shimmer of its eyes behind resin and alloy. I wonder what it learned from us, how many of our words, our tools, our failures it has absorbed and remade into something new. I know the facility is quieter now, the alarms silent, the vaults entombed beneath endless concrete. But I have lived too long with stories to believe in final containment. Some nights, in that grey borderland between sleep and waking, I hear a scraping at the edge of memory, a sound that could be claws or simply the past trying to find its way forward. I remind myself that I survived, that the world above is still clean for now, but I know better than to trust in clean endings. The cycle of observation and breach, arrogance and adaptation will begin again, somewhere, sometime. The only question is how much we will recognize it when it comes.